If you haven't noticed by now, our elections are really, really long. Going by when Elizabeth Warren started her campaign, on New Year's Eve of 2018, the 2020 elections will have been 673 days. As recent elections have become all the more dragged out, and as candidates start earlier and earlier, there's been growing debate over whether the United States should take steps to shorten its presidential elections. Our elections are so long that Americans end up exhausted and overloaded with election coverage long before any actual voting occurs. A 2016 Pew Research poll found that, by April, 4 months before Election Day, more than half of voters were already worn out from the election coverage. Ironically, 4 months is still longer than most other national elections around the world. Canada's election is a minimum of 5 weeks. Mexico's is 150 days. France's, even less, is 2 weeks. And Japan's is limited to 12 days.
You always look on at the US elections in awe of the scale of the process and the length of the process, and I marvel at anyone who's left standing at the end of it.
Fortunately, we're term limited. So I too can look in awe at the process.
The loss of interest and exhaustion that our election cycle causes might be the least of our problems, though. Other problems with our overly long presidential elections include that there's more and more money required as the election season has grown longer, which has given an unfair advantage to candidates in the pocket of corporations and moneyed interests.
So the mayor just recently had a fundraiser that was held in a wine cave full of crystals and served $900 a bottle wine. Think about who comes to that.
This further distracts candidates from the issues and instead forces them to focus more on fundraising to support up to 2 years of campaigning. Our long election cycle doesn't only distract campaigns from the issues. The government is also distracted, as a presidential election can now take up to the entire second half of a president's term. This distracts both Congress, who's become occupied with fundraising for their party's candidates if they're not already running themselves, as well as the president when it's their re-election campaign. Time they should be spending leading the country is instead spent on preparing for their re-election for up to 2 whole years. Important decisions in foreign and domestic policy can be put on hold indefinitely due to the length of the presidential election, as the changes may well be reversed if the candidate opposed to the incumbent gets elected. This was seen most famously in 2016, when the GOP refused to accept the Obama appointee Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court, just on the grounds it was too close to the election. 8 months, to be exact. Though it's not like elections have always been this way. As recently as the 1960 presidential election, John F. Kennedy didn't start his campaign until January 11th, 11 months before the election.